What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Modern Marketer, brought to you by Modern Commerce. If you are listening to or watching this podcast. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Modern Marketer, brought to you by Modern Commerce. Casey, you are muted, so I'm gonna give you a second to just figure that out. That mute button, it's tough. I get it.
Yeah, I got one of these loose cords plugged into my mic.
Yeah,
when you go to like an old hotel and you
Yep.
plug in your cell phone charger
You're
and
like,
it just
"Ooh,
falls right out of the wall.
Yeah.
That's the exact situation I have.
The only analogies I can think of are not work appropriate. They're not safe for work
Right.
analogies, but you get the picture.
NSFW.
Yeah. And
Yeah. Anyway, my mic cord fell out of my mic, and when that happens with the software we're using, it automatically mutes you.
The question is the problem on the male side or the female side?
I could check the egg count of the mic,
Yeah.
and the sperm count of the wire, but I'm just going to try swapping the wires and see what happens. More than likely, no matter where the problem is, it's probably going to be a little bit better. I'm going to have that.
Honestly, it's probably a little bit of both. You know, they're just a little too used to each other at this point.
A little change is good. A little variety. It's the spice of life.
They got to switch it up a little bit. The mic and the cord.
Exactly. Now you're getting it, John.
Yeah, I am. I mean, my wife keeps telling me that, but I don't really get it. Casey, how's your week going? We're recording on a Friday. Fridays have been big recording days for us lately.
Well, kind of in a daily cycle lately, as opposed to more of a weekly. I'm so used to the weekly, like even going back to our agency days, you're kind of more on even a monthly cycle there in certain positions, especially strategy positions. You're more in like a monthly cycle. And the more you're doing things, which with our most recent endeavors into podcasting and whatnot, there's been a heavy weekly cycle. And now with some of the content we're creating, I'm in a daily cycle. And it's just three different mindsets altogether. Daily cycle is all about just like break things and move quickly and just go. Yeah. And if it's not great, just publish it, get it out, get it done, ship it, move it. And realizing that the weekly, I was used to it for so long, and the monthly it's that 100-foot away view where you're looking at it, and you can take all the time in the world you want. How do I feel about this? Let me gather my thoughts, and that's 3 weeks away before I have to actually
even think about
show some kind of thought pattern on this and,
right.
and explain myself.
Think about it for a while. It's a lot of output though on the daily cycle. Because you're outputting 3 podcasts and videos a day for our sports pod. So it's like it's a lot of output, which is nice, right? Like you get to finish each day feeling like you did something.
It's true.
I finish a lot of days feeling like I did nothing. Mostly because I didn't do anything on those days. But like it just, it's nice to have. It's like it's kind of why I think people like mowing their lawn. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like you mow the lawn and you're like, look at that. The lawn is mowed now. It's finished. I've done it.
A feeling of accomplishment for sure. That's a good comp to it, I would say. Yeah. Definitely there's a sense of just obvious like output, which is nice. But at the same time, it's easy to get lost in it too.
Yeah, you get lost in it. Yep. All right. Well, we got a couple of our weekly shows here. We're going to record today, so this will be fun. Doing a Modern Marketer. What do we got? What do we got today, Casey? I think you kind of planned this one, yeah?
Yeah. So
that'd have been weird if you were like, no. No, I thought you had something. Okay.
Yeah, well, bye everybody.
We published this anyway, so people hear all this.
Yeah, that sounds like us. Like I said, you just got to ship it. Don't think too much about it. Why show up with a plan? Now, John, just recently you posted a tweet on Twitter.
Yeah, imagine that's where you post tweets. Yep.
Well, sometimes on Instagram, I guess.
That's true. Some people, that's a trend right now. People are screenshotting them and making them into carousels on the Instagrams.
Yeah, I guess that just changed the delivery mechanism a little bit. But we are on Twitter today. Wanted to take a look at this. It got a little bit of run, a little organic lift, I think you might say.
Yeah, I thought it was shadow banned there for a minute, but it turns out my content just sucked.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I thought it was good, man.
Oh,
but we're going to take a look at this tweet that you put out. There were some responses to it. I have some questions around it as well that I'll ask you. But just so that the audience can see what we're talking about.
And if you're on audio, we'll read it, so you don't have to be able to see it. But
absolutely,
you can see it if you're on the video. pod on YouTube. There it is. Do you want me to read it? Like, yeah, I'll read it.
I'll go ahead and since it was your words. Usually I would read it if I pulled it up, but since they're your words, I'll do that, and I'll try to. We have a pretty good Zoom going on, so if you are watching on a video platform, you can actually read along too. Or if you're like you like punctuation and you want to make sure that John didn't misspell any words and stuff like that. But yeah, I'll let you read and I'll just follow along here. We'll stay in this nice Zoom.
So I need to like put on my audio vote, like my audio. Like if I were to ever read a book on Audible, it would be like this. All right, here we go. That was kind of
lacklusterly laid in the lollipop lane and landed a little
late.
Leap.
Leap.
I just try to stay on the L's. I don't know.
Right there for you.
Hey, man, you never know where it's going to go with improv, all right?
No.
All right, John.
Here's what the tweet says. It says, brands, this is why your agencies suck. I remember when I first started freelancing before I hired anyone, before I really had a quote unquote agency, I figured if I grinded hard and did good work for my clients and made a deal where if I won, they won, or if they won, I won, then I could work with 3 or 4 brands and have an uncapped earning potential. I would grow as they grew. So I grinded. I took a few brands that were long shots. These were brands that needed someone to put in the hours scripting, editing, sourcing, and testing new creatives every single day. These were brands that needed someone to not only give them feedback on their landing pages, but to actually make the landing pages for them, literally. These were brands that needed someone to look at their margins and the cost of acquisition and build compelling offers for them. So actually take their products and bundle them into compelling offers. And I mean, actually build them in their Shopify backend, make the products, make sure the offers worked with their fulfillment systems, all of that stuff. Basically, these were brands that needed someone to do what whole teams usually do, which is everything. And they needed it fast and they needed it for a low price. So I did it for a low price, but plenty of upside. So if I won, they won. And the fact is, some of them did win. Some of them got big. Some of them sold. They made a lot of money. Lives were changed. The other fact is, I don't work with a single one of these brands today. Some of these brands got big on the back of my work. And I'm not talking about being like a part of what made them big. I'm talking about being the 20% of their team that drove 80% of the results. Without fail, the ones who gained success with me moved on. Some of them did it the first time. We didn't have a month that we set a new revenue record. Some of it did it because of my if I win, you win strategy. They felt like the check they sent me every month started feeling like a lot of money to them, even if the amount of money actually made logical sense. Many did it because some agency came along and just gave them a better pitch than I did. These agencies used nice fancy slide decks, things that I've used as an agency since. They used terminology that meant absolutely nothing, but it sounded like they knew what they were talking about. They told the brands about super cool targeting tactics that I'd already tested and I knew didn't work. Basically, they just came along and they looked more buttoned up than the scrappy kid who was actually making things work for them. So that's kind of the end of the tweet. And I posed 2 questions to the audience. One, what would you do if you were me? What would your takeaway have been? Because the funny thing here is I started this whole tweet by saying, this is why your agency sucks. And then I proceeded to tell people about the early days of having my agency. And kind of seems like it's actually the brands that suck, not the agency in this scenario. There's a part 2 of this tweet. This was like more than twice as long when I originally wrote it. And then I was like, that's too much. People aren't going to read that. So I would just put this part in there. And if I figured if it got good engagement, then I would put part 2 on Twitter. Maybe I'll do that today after we record all of our shows. But that's the end of the tweet. Casey, do you have a response? I've just talked for quite a long time.
Yeah, I'll give you a little breather here. Your last 2 questions in the tweet, or your only questions, I suppose, are what would you do if you were me, and what would your takeaway have been? I think I'm a little biased, right? Like,
right, because you were there.
Like, yeah, well, I mean,
this might be some of this was before you were there, but yeah,
there's overlap at least, right? Like, there's, and I think that even
came back to us. Yeah,
for sure. So I think I'm a little biased on this. I think it'll sound more or less like the same sort of answer you would give to your own questions. But I also think that these are actually like real questions too. I don't think they're fully rhetorical, which
Right.
I think a lot of people do on Twitter. I think honestly, even you do it sometimes. Like you ask a question.
I mean,
kind
I
of,
wrote out a whole answer to this, but I was like, hey, I mean, before I get into that,
right.
there's a lot of people who follow me, and that's why we're doing this on Modern Marketer. There's a lot of people who listen to the pod who are agency people. There's a lot of people who follow me on Twitter who are agency people. And I tend to actually kind of shit on the agencies a little more often, actually, which is funny because I'm from the agency background. But I basically just say that, hey, the agency business model, it's not aligned with a brand business model. So no matter, if you're on the brand side, that you got to know that going in. But yeah, I figured this would resonate with all the people who follow me and listen to us that are agency folks.
Yeah. So you probably, I guess you do have your thoughts. You have a second half of this already written. So you have your thoughts prepared on these two questions already. But what I mean to say is like, you're not just asking the question for content's sake, just to get answers so that you can already like battle them. I think that there's actually like more often here than in the usual stance. I would think that somebody could actually maybe have a thought that changes your mind on something, because this is like,
Potentially.
this is very personal to your experience as opposed to just kind of a broad, philosophical marketing question. So my questions to this or my answers to this would be probably pretty similar to what actually happened. So what would you do if you were me? I mean, ultimately, knowing what I know with the context that I can't really remove, knowing what I know about you and wanting to, being such a, I use these terms, like peak chaser and floor watcher, and I think you are like the quintessential like peak chaser. You want to just chase down the biggest thing and make the biggest impact all the time. And once you get that one, like maybe that's not sustainable, but like we don't have to sustain it as long as we repeat it as often as possible. Right.
Yeah.
So knowing that you want to share in the upside so bad with these successes, because you just want to create successes, right? You can't guarantee that'll always happen with every client, but that's what you're optimizing for generally. But you want to be aligned in the way that when that happens, you get rewarded, which I think is basically the frustration that kind of comes off of this tweet. So what would you do if you were me? I mean, yeah, knowing what I know about you, I would probably get out of the agency.
Well, I continue to follow the agency path for several years after this, multiple years.
Sure. Yeah. But I mean, ultimately, like just feeling like you got several brands kind of to the quote unquote mountaintop, that you were, the self-described mountaintop at a certain point in their brand journey.
Yeah.
I mean, even in my experience, we've definitely done that with brands. We brought them on in one spot that we go, what are your ultimate goals? And we go pretty much immediately to that spot. That's happened before.
Yeah.
And yeah, we never really shared too much in the upside because then they'd cut bait, which you already described. But that's why I say ultimately, I'm like, oh, it seems like not a great fit for like this model, actually. Like maybe you do belong more on the brand side, which you're doing more of now. So that's what I think about what would I do if I were you, and what would your takeaway have been? I mean, it would have been just that like I think either your approach has to change, like your mindset about it has to change, and maybe you adopt a little bit more of that floor watcher kind of babysitting mentality, to fit super well into agency life, which I wouldn't say that like, I'm not necessarily like the peak chaser you are, but I'm not so floor watchery that all I would do is like, babysit something, either. But I identify a little bit more with that side of the spectrum, I guess, than you in comparison to you. I think most people would. And that'd be my takeaway, is either your mindset has to adjust or the environment has to adjust, which is more the route you went. Because I don't think your mindset, you're at this point in your career, I think things like this can slightly change your opinion on things. But I think your overall perspective in business is pretty fixed. I think you're pretty rigid at this point. You have your thoughts and you have your successes to back it up. So like, what if someone's got to give? It doesn't have to be John. That's my opinion. Typically, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I hear you. I don't know if I agree that it's fixed. I think, it really, without getting into sharing like the essentially second half of what I wrote here, I think you're more or less dead on. It's like you can just bail, start your own brand, or you can essentially adjust the agency business model. But remember the beginning of the tweet. The beginning of the tweet was, here's why your agencies suck, right? So here's a story about being an agency. What would you do? You would adjust your business model to the business model that you as a brand now say sucks for brands, right? Like
Mhm.
now agencies fit everything into a playbook. They don't do that kind of work. They don't grind like that. They don't care about the brand. Like I was
Yeah.
thinking about my brands in the shower, like when I was taking walks, like not
Right.
my own business, not my own agency business, not that at all. I was thinking about the brands that I was working with. So yeah, I mean, you adjust, like what you would do is you would keep that momentum going because that's the business you've started to build, and you would adjust it to be, you know, just more proofed against that, which ultimately creates less investment in the individual brands, right? If any brand goes out of business, I'm just moving on. You're muted again, by the way.
Thanks for that. Yeah, no, I do agree with what you're saying. Are you hearing a little echo? I don't want to echo on you.
You're good.
Okay. Let's move on to some of the responses you got from this tweet.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
that might be
Yeah.
the right move here, because you got a few and from some people I know as well. So maybe I'll have something to say about that. Okay, so first off, reply by you. Glad to see this getting a bit of engagement. It did get a little over 7,000 views.
You know what
so
I always, what I always think about bookmarks are really weird. Like it's always weird to me when things get more bookmarks than they do like comments or something like that. Like, well, you need to bookmark this. Like what?
I heard
sometimes if I do
somewhere
like
that's a really like valuable, like, to the algorithm.
yeah, like, well, so if I do like a 6 tips type of thread or something like that, I get a bookmark. I understand the bookmark then, but like you need to bookmark this story. Like what? Why? Like you can
Maybe they were planning on coming back and writing a reply to it.
I
I don't
guess.
know.
Yeah.
That seems like a weird way to use Twitter. Honestly, I can't even
Yeah,
imagine.
I know,
that,
I know. I never understand when I see tons of bookmarks on things that I'm like, I think you could just read that and like internalize it. Like you don't need to. It's not like there's
Right.
tips there you need to remember. Plus,
Or
I
it's
think people use their social media bookmarks. Like I bookmark things all the time. I almost never come back to them.
I could see somebody using the bookmark function pretty similar to the retweet, but you almost don't want to have that out there, that you don't want to have people see that you retweeted it or liked it or something. So it could be that, like, this is a little hidden stash for me to like come back and look at later or something, or
Right.
even
Or
a
like I want
timeline
to
of
give
that
this
on.
validity. I want to give this tweet validity.
Yeah, kind of like
Yeah.
a diary feed almost, where it's like, this is just for me, because nobody can see what you bookmarked, right?
Right,
It doesn't. There's no personal bookmarks, so
Yeah.
yeah, they can see your likes, they can see your quote tweets, your retweets, those things. So maybe that's how they use it. I don't know. I don't think I've ever hit bookmark on anything. So not a power user on Twitter.
I want to look over people's shoulders as they use social media. I don't know if you've
yeah,
ever
that
done
sounds
that with your
creepy.
significant other, but it's
Creepy.
it's an interesting experience.
Okay, so in this reply, you also said that you wrote a second half, which you already shared with us.
Yeah.
Let me know if I should post it. I don't know. TBD, I guess. First real reply here is from Charles. I'll save that for. There we go. He says, the question is, did you ever take a loss when your work didn't perform? Skin in the game isn't about upside, it's about downside, losing when they lose, not winning when they win. Of course, any brand doesn't want to proportionally pay someone more as they earn more. Did you consider changing your model based on learning this fact?
Yeah, I'm like, obviously I don't know if I ever learned that fact. Like I
Didn't
understand.
you learn something, John?
Did you
Gosh, what were
learn
you
that?
doing?
Did you learn that sometimes businesses lose money?
Yeah.
Yeah, like I already knew that. Like they were mostly already losing money when they came to me. Like that's kind of what I meant. Is it's like they're losing. They're about to be done like next month. Um, so yeah, like that. I mean, I'm specifically like when he's like, "Did you lose when they lost?" I'm like, the ones that I'm talking about in this tweet, first of all, were losing.
Undefeated.
They were defeated, right? Like they were losing. They're about to be done like next month, and then we didn't take any L's for like a long time after.
Yeah, I mean, once they joined with you, they were undefeated. Like,
yeah,
at least the
for
ones
a really
that
long time. Yeah,
that I overlapped with, that's my memory of most of them, at least.
right. Yeah, so that's what I mean. I mean, these are like my home. I'm talking about like my home runs, my highlight reel. Not all of them are like that. And just to be
Right. You're
clear,
talking about stuff that you feel like you got compensated relatively poorly for really good performance. So it's already eliminating the bad performances. So Charles, take that.
Yeah. So that's one part of this. But I think I responded to him like in a sense, the answer is yes to both parts, right? So for example, like, did I lose when they lost? Like, the way that a service business model works, like the way that I would structure these deals is like, if they didn't win, I like didn't make any money, right? So I would make zero and I still had bills, right? And like they might lose money. I didn't give them more money to lose, if that's what he means. But I would not make any money, and I wasn't working with other brands, right? And the other thing I wasn't doing was I wasn't building my business model to like need other brands. It was like, these are the three that I'm rolling with. These are my ride or dies. When they win, I'm going to win. If they lose, I'm not going to be making any money, right? So similar to like a injury attorney or something like that. I don't make any money unless you win. But most of these were like long shots. So that's the other thing, is it's like I wasn't just only taking cases that were going to be winners. That I was taking like long shots, and I was like, I'm not taking any business. So the way that I lost was like, I'm not going to make any money at all. Zero. I don't have any money. Like, I don't even have like, I wasn't like independently wealthy or anything like that. And I'm not building my business in a way that is like gonna make, like, I'm gonna make some money somewhere else. So in a sense, like, yes, like I set myself up to be like, if you lose, I will also lose. Like, I won't be able to pay rent.
If I may, there's something in my personal experience. So this isn't just pulling from what you've said. This is in that overlap time period. So maybe not accounting for all of the circumstances that you were tweeting about necessarily, but I think I have a decent sample size to speak about this. In those situations, there's something else kind of totally separate that I would say that I noticed looking back on. And it's like, if you're not going to get compensated on the super high highs for not very long, the other thing you could do is kind of lower that upside in your model and try to pitch like a longer contract length, right? Still getting like a nice meaty, bit of revenue for like having a partnership, like nobody wants to say yes to something and like like have their whole livelihood rest on some month by month. Like, you can leave me whenever you want, and I can't make a ton of money from you or anything. Like, that's a hard way to make a living. Like,
no, I mean, look, what I was doing, it was a hard way to make a living. I was like I was betting a lot on my skills, and back then, it was a time where, like, if you were just a really good growth marketer and really good at paid ads, then you could make brand work. So I was betting a lot on it. I couldn't have signed a long contract with any of these, like the ones that I'm thinking of. It's like, yeah, all right, I can sign a long contract with you, but dude, I'm not going to be in business in 2 months. So I don't, it's not going to be helpful.
So that was going to be my point. Not that exactly, but if somebody said like, oh, you should just readjust your model and maybe, try to get more of it on a duration basis instead of like, oh, you want to get, make it work that way. And that would be my point, is one, these brands weren't all super stable for one. And that's not really in the cards necessarily, but your opportunity to get paid is when they just had a cash influx because you performed well and they can now afford you. So that's why that makes sense. And the other thing is, in all the brands that I can remember, the longest standing ones, the ones that hurt the most to lose because they were around for the longest, those, at least in the ones I remember, were month-to-month clients that were just generally the happiest with us. And we never pushed a longer discussion onto them. Like, it was always just month to month. The ones that we intentionally came in and tried to go, it's a minimum 3 month. We'd rather do 6 month. We start with like 6 month minimum, and then maybe we get negotiated down to 3. But anytime we did that, that was what ended up being, not anytime, but with these ones in particular, felt more like a maximum, honestly, looking back on it in hindsight now. Whereas month to month usually surpassed that pretty easily because it just became so clear, like, the value exchange is good here. But there's something about that negotiation, like, that's where it's easy to say, just change your business model. But all of a sudden, leads that should be closing can just drop off because you can't agree to like some guarantee of 6 months, which would make it so much easier to swallow like half of the upside, right?
Sorry, and to anyone listening to this who's like, oh, I see ways that you could have adjusted this business model, or I see, or anyone who responds to it and says that, it's like, well, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I led with, this is why your agencies suck. Like, because you can't run this business model that is actually, that's the best business. What I just described, that's the best thing for the brands. Somebody who's that invested, somebody who's like smart, skilled, is willing to bet, on their capabilities and like is going to be that invested, that's the best, most aligned thing for the brand. But it doesn't work out. So anyone who's like, oh yeah, well, why don't you adjust your business model? I'm like, that's what I'm saying. Yes, all agencies adjust their business model, and that's why they suck. That's why brands say they don't like agencies.
Okay, moving on to the next one here from I am Shackleford, Nikki Shacks, the Shack Man, Shack Attack,
Yeah,
Shackalicious definition. Okay,
Shackle, Nikki Shacks.
he says
Just got married. Shout out Nick and Shanice. Congrats on the wedding in Barcelona.
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 It's a soft.
Barcelona.
Thank you. Respect the culture. Okay. Anyway, Shaq says no loyalty in this game, survival at all costs. Which actually right now live from the Modern Commerce account, I'm going to go ahead and like that one. Not because I necessarily love it. Love the message behind it.
That was your wedding present.
Yeah.
Wedding present to Nikki Shacks was one like on his reply to my tweet.
But this is such a Shaq response. It's like vibes first.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm like, oh, this feels like you just
in the game.
Like if you asked Sylvester Stallone or like some action star from the 80s or 90s this question, you'd be like, Arnold Schwarzenegger would be perfect. No loyalty in this game, survival at all costs.
Survival at all costs. Yeah.
So I like the vibes of it, but I kind of hate that this is like a honestly pretty truthful answer.
So I think the thing
and from a guy who owns an agency nonetheless, just
right. Yeah. I think the person who bought our agency. So I think that what bugs agency people, what bugs agency marketers or good marketers who are willing to be freelancers and agencies, and they're willing to work for another brand, and like they want to be like, yes, I would like to only work for you and 2 other brands, and I would like to have an uncapped earning potential. I would like to do really good work, really meaningful work, and really impactful work, and I'd like to get compensated really well for that. The better I do, the more I get, the more money I make. That's what I would like to do, right? I think what rubs marketers like that wrong is that it's not just survival. Like they were thriving, right? A lot of times you get those brands to a point where they're thriving,
and then, survival is no longer something they're trying to outrun.
So that's the thing. It's like for whatever reason they think that they don't want to dance with the one that brought them to the dance. Like, so yeah, I think that's what it really is. It's like, yeah, no loyalty in the game, absolutely true. Survival at all costs, but a lot of times it's not even like, yeah, I got him past that survival at all costs phase, and then it's like how quickly they forget, really.
Yeah.
So yeah, and this is none of this. And if you're listening to this, like, oh, this guy's like bitching and complaining, like, no, that's what I'm saying. Again, the first part of this was like, here's why your agency suck. Here's why every brand thinks that the agency isn't good, and this is why I always say that the business model isn't aligned, because here's an aligned business model. Yeah. And it never works out for the marketer, never works out for the agency to run an aligned business model.
You say that's why I always say this, but this is an example of it just defending my stance from earlier. I guess I shouldn't have said like fixed view, but more rigid view than when you were living in the time that you're referencing here. That's all I really meant, is that you firmed up some of your thoughts. And well, the reason you always say that now is because you didn't. I mean, I was around for the second half of this era. You didn't really say stuff like
last 3/4 of this era.
Sure, fair enough. I was trying to be humble there, but the agency not being aligned based off of like a basic model isn't something that you said as much back then. Maybe you did say it here and there. I'm not too sure, but but now I definitely have noticed the increased frequency of that message because it's become more relevant to kind of our partnerships. So anyway, let's move on. Yusuf has a last reply, and then I have a couple questions I'll just rapid fire at you before we close out, John. Yusuf says, very common with performance deals, no matter how much you make them and no matter how small your percentage is, if the actual amounts get relatively big, they'll replace you.
Yeah.
But to be fair, if you look at it from an LTV perspective, I bet you've made decent money.
Yeah, I mean both statements true. with these brands, I did in many cases end up making decent money, and that's why I set the deals up that way. And for a time, they're happy to pay it, but pretty soon it starts to feel like sending somebody a check for 25K is like, it's just one guy. I feel like we could hire a whole team for that or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that the miss here is that it's like, well, yes, I made fine money, but I didn't build a business that accounted for like that the disloyal, or accounted for them essentially, like, no matter how small the percentage is or no matter how much it makes sense to pay me that performance pay, you know, there's just an amount that they're not going to like. I didn't build a business model that accounted for that, right? I built a business model where it was like, I want to find a few brands to work with, and that's what I want to do for the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever.
Right.
And I want to have an uncapped earning potential doing that. That is, so this was, I think this was just the whole experience of learning that world doesn't exist, right? And that's why the agency business models are the way that they are, right? And so yes, I did make fine money, but and that carried me through to being able to figure out, like, there were some months I was just burning through that money that I made trying to figure out, like, oh, I can't do business like this. I actually have to have a steady flow of inbound leads, and we have to have a playbook for everybody, and we have to not care so much about our client businesses, to be honest. So yeah, no, I mean, this is all pretty true. You have any input here? Because I think this is where you sort of came into the picture.
Yeah. So based off of the situation you set up, which when you are the OP in a Twitter thread, you are setting up the universe. And to be fair, I bet you made decent money. Is the goal on your home run clients to make decent money or like good?
That's
money?
A great point. My goal was to create the lifestyle that I was looking for when I get into this, right?
Yeah.
So my goal was to find the few brands that I could work for doing really great work for whenever, however long, you know, support my family on it, you know, until my kids grow up or in past. Like that was the goal. So to take brands that were distressed, to save them, and to stay with them for however long they were continue to be a brand.
Yeah. The only other thing I have to say on this particular reply is they're going to replace you thing. The more deals that we've done over the years, the more I realize that decision making is so situational. A lot of brands, they come in knowing, hey, we're gonna, like, whatever happens, this is a 3-month deal, and then we're gonna try something else for 3 months. Like, we're gonna move on from there.
Yeah.
And
no, I've been on the brand side now, and there are like literally some brand directors who are like, that's literally the mindset while they're taking the pitch.
Unless you know that about a brand too from the agency side, you can't figure that out. And I mean, unless you squeeze it out of them.
They'll tell you like, yeah, we're looking for long-term partners. Like, it's wild.
Exactly. But they want it. I mean, what they learn from agencies is like, you got to be testing. And they're like, well, it seems like the biggest like testing we could do is test different agencies. Like, you know, we don't really need to know the tactics at all if we're diversified across different agencies that we could choose from for quarterly, you know, like, so I get that a little bit, but it also is ultimately, I think, pretty short-sighted. Even though you're trying to be diversified, maybe across different agencies, it does feel like, I mean, we've been on the end of this. I remember like my first big account, we had it for a year. I was the key player in the fulfillment of that account. And we were just skyrocketing upwards on revenue on like a volume basis and an efficiency basis. And when they just turned out, it was exactly a calendar year, I think.
Yeah.
When we landed the deal.
Since you'd started, it was a calendar year.
Yeah.
So we had actually been with them about 6 months before that even.
Yeah. So but either way, it felt like this decision was not based off of, it felt, and I could be wrong, because again, you don't hear what they're thinking internally, but it felt like soul crushing. What did I do wrong? Like, why are you leaving me, Veronica? Yeah. Like, why? You know, why would you leave me? Like, we've been so good together. I would never do this to you. And you know, you wouldn't. That's how it feels, because you're like, I would never walk away from you. This is a good account for me. We're thriving. Why did you leave me?
You're winning. I'm winning. Why are we doing this? Yeah.
Well, because now I've upgraded. Now I can get better maybe than you. Like, maybe, and maybe cheaper. Maybe I
or
can.
there's a perception they can, or maybe they
Yeah.
think they can do it in house or whatever. Or maybe they can. So the other problem, I think, and this is part of the second half of my post here, is that it's like you don't gain anything by being transparent and honest as an agency. You're doing good business, and in many ways it's sort of the industry standard to be transparent and honest. So I'm not saying don't be transparent and honest, but I am saying that you don't get anything by doing it. You give them all the tools they need to like move on, right? And you give their next agency all the tools they need to pick up and like just kind of continue the momentum you already created. It's really easy to keep momentum going.
That is why I've noticed it a bunch of times. I don't necessarily have this view. I don't think it's actually totally correct, but I think it's definitely a view you can operate with and be pretty successful with. I've met plenty of people on the agency side, especially, who look at security as a zero-sum game. The more you build security for the brand, you're performing for them so that they're covered. They're not as worried about paying the bills anymore. You're losing security on your side because they're just able to consider more options now, and their load is lifted. You come in and relieved a huge amount of stress for them. Now they can sit back and make some decisions, and you're a little chess piece on their board. Whereas when they met you and they were hoping you were their savior, and you ultimately, okay, maybe that we're going a little.
You had the
maybe you weren't the savior, but they needed you so bad.
Yeah,
and then the better you perform, the more you tip the scale in their favor. That seems so misaligned, to your point. So I don't know. That's my thoughts on that.
It is misaligned, and that's why the agency model's changed, and that's why the brands don't like dealing with agencies now. So like, and you when they come to you, you have the knowledge of how to fix it, right? And that we're like, at least in these situations, and I think a lot of marketers, especially ones that are from that kind of heyday of e-commerce era, had this experience where it's like they came to you and you had the knowledge of how to like make their thing work. And then the more you made it work, the more you actually just shared that knowledge with them and put that knowledge in plain sight into their ad account, into their email account, into their landing pages, and made it really easy for someone to come along and just like, okay, now I can continue that momentum. But before they came to you, it was like, like it was some secret box that they just realized, like you kind of opened slowly for them. So they didn't realize it was they don't realize how much they learned, working with you.
100%. So, okay, let's go into the lightning round here. I have 3 questions for you. It doesn't have to be lightning, but I would advise you, I'm not going to tell you all the questions at once. I would advise you not to over answer the questions, or you might kind of stomp on future answers.
Okay.
So 3 questions. First off, John, how have your thoughts changed on this topic as a fractional CMO? Since this era, now that you've done a lot more fractional CMO work, using that brain, wearing that hat, especially, how have your thoughts changed? And I guess overall, just in general, how have your thoughts changed on this?
When I say that agencies' business models aren't aligned, I mean that very literally. Don't hear what I'm not saying. What I'm not saying is that agencies shouldn't be used. Agencies are a useful tool, and the brands that use them best are the ones that have internal people that understand how the agency fits in as a vendor and can utilize them effectively. Not, they're not relying on agency to save their business.
Wow. Nice. Beautiful. John, second question. What would make you re-enter the agency world? And I guess I mean in like a mostly full-time sort of.
Okay. So 2 things. Actually, I'll just go with one since you said to not over answer. Selfishly, I would not enter on the fulfillment side. I'm just personally not interested in that anymore. I would maybe help manage a fulfillment team within an agency. And I actually consult on Mentor Pass with a lot of agencies within an agency that understands like, hey, you know what, there's some perceptional, like the best thing you can do as an agency is just work with the mindset of like, we're going to work in a system, and the system's going to be designed for, if it can work, we can make it work, but not outside of scope. Right. So if the agency understands that, then I'll advise on fulfillment. But I wouldn't enter on fulfillment. I would maybe enter on like biz dev and marketing, because I am very interested in like content creation, content marketing, continuing to do the content that we do, and having that feed an agency partner that I actually think has like a good success rate for the right clients.
Awesome. All right, last question here, John. So you can take away whatever you want from the current climate, current thoughts, preconceptions, all kinds of things. This is like a fantasy question. Feel free to get crazy with it, as crazy as you want. I challenge you.
All right.
Make it a good, put a good topper on this. This is the whipped cream and the cherry on top of the episode. People have had their steak, they've had their vegetables. Dessert time.
They ate their ice cream even. It's just whipped cream and cherry time now.
Yeah, this is just like this is the gooey part of the sundae in the bottom of the bowl. But secretly, that's whoever's listening to this favorite part, whatever that means to them. All right. Yeah. Having been on both sides, agency and brand, what would be a better model for all parties involved? What would be the most aligned? You could do it if you play God here. You can control whatever you want. You can move things around. You can say, well, you have to do this. You have to do that. Imagine it's for, you're mediating this and you're saying, this is how it goes. This is the new model that everybody has to do. Maybe you can variate off this, but here's how it's going to be better. Everybody just start doing it. I'm John and John Almighty.
Yeah. I think there's one that I'll give like a hypothetical here. So I think in a hypothetical situation where like this happened again, I think that doing contracts like they do for athletes might not be a bad way to do it, where it's like, oh, you're signing a 2-year, however much like deal, right? Where it's like, you can just lock in that like performance deal for 6 months or a year or something like that. And it actually gets upheld. So that's the biggest thing, is that contracts mean nothing in e-commerce D2C marketing agency world. They get violated all the time, or the client asks if they can violate them. And unless it's like in some crazy amount of money, nobody's going to litigate over it. So they can just leave even if it violates a contract. And it happens all the time. Like, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just telling you what happens, right? So actually upholding the contracts and setting the contracts like that probably would mitigate a lot. Like loyalty would mitigate a lot. Another model that I think I've seen that I think is probably a better way of doing it is I've seen some agencies that specifically they'll do like a partner model. So I might have an agency. If I want to do e-commerce, I might have an agency where I have an e-commerce agency that partners with creators who do not have an e-commerce brand yet, and I work with them to launch an e-commerce brand. And I have equity in it. And I've seen some agencies do it where it's like they have equity in it, and their whole role is like a first 3 months or first 6 months kind of role. Then they have a minority equity, and then they kind of hand it off to the partner to be to like run the operations of the business and stuff like that, right? And the creator's manager would do that or whatever. So yeah, those kinds of things I think could work a little bit better, where it's like you can build your own holding company portfolio with sweat equity. I think that could work.
Mm-hmm. I love it. So essentially turn agency contracts into athlete contracts.
Right. Yeah. Turn agency contracts
into
athlete.
Does that mean you can trade that contract to a different brand?
Yeah.
Like, hey, I don't want these guys anymore, but I got them for the next 6 months. They made me sign this crazy deal. Can't get out of it. It's fully guaranteed.
That's actually a great way to put it, is that it's like they can't just drop it. Like, they either have to pay out the contract or find you another brand to work with that will pay the contract, or like you do with look, that's a weird one. Nobody's going to do that. And that's why it's not like this. So, like nobody's going to go. That would be
great though, if legally the responsibility went on the brand side, who is, let's be honest, it's usually the one who breaks like a minimum or something, saying I'm out of here. Like, hey, you can be out of here, but you got to replace this revenue, bucko. Even if that means, I think that could still work out for them, because that could mean limiting the upside by a ton. Here, I'll pass you off to this like lesser brand. Maybe I'll pay half of it or something just to be rid of you, like you would with like a trade. And
I think it only works. Yeah, it works like, it's like, hey, if we're going to take a flyer as an agency, we're going to make nothing if you make nothing, and then we do that, and that's going to be a 3 month. And then we get to a point like where it's like, as soon as you pay us this month, this much, then we're going to go to a 6 month and you're responsible for the revenue, whatever it is. Something like that. Like, yeah, you got to pass it off to another brand, or you got to pay it out or whatever.
I mean, how funny would the atmosphere be if that was the case? I guess it would seem a lot like sports.
Yeah.
That'd be fun. That's the kind of answer I was looking for.
Yeah, something... EGM was traded to Snow Teeth Whitening. Yeah.
Ooh, baby. Yeah. All right, John. That's all I have for this episode of Modern Marketer. I'll give you the floor to get us out of here. But I'll say goodbye to everybody first. Thanks, guys. Casey, you can follow Modern Commerce at ModCom Podcast on Twitter, and yeah, we'll make handles for Modern Marketer as well.
Yeah, maybe.
Right now,
we already don't
Modern
post very
Commerce.
much from Modern Commerce. So.
Yeah, follow Modern Commerce. It's kind of our hub for everything.
Or just follow me. I probably am the most active one on Twitter at John J.
Agreed. Yeah, good. Follow John.
Yeah. Okay. So if I were to give a parting shot here, I would say there's nothing wrong with the agency business model. And for brands, like if you think, hey, agencies suck, well, it's probably just a symptom of, I'll share more about this in another post, but it's probably just a symptom of like your brand doesn't necessarily have the right bones to work for an agency, to work for the agencies that are really good. Your brand doesn't have the right characteristics for them. So they either don't want to work with you, or if they do want to work with you, they're charging an amount of money that you can't afford. So there's nothing wrong with building an agency business model. This is why they've been built this way, is because there's just no loyalty and nobody's really looking to work this way. And anyone who's had a track record, like you could have caught me in 2017. And, if you're a brand, you could have caught me in 2017 and I would have taken $0 in equity in your brand and just done sweat equity and taken ownership. I would have done that then. I wouldn't do that now, right? I don't need to do that now. So I guess that's probably if you're a brand saying all agencies suck and I never fit into their model, you gotta, I guess, you're gonna have to go find some scrappy freelancer who will do it for just pure equity. And it's not gonna be easy, but it's partially brand's fault that we've gotten to this in the agency brand kind of world and dichotomy. And it's not new. Marketing agencies have existed for long before we created one. So I can't imagine it's new.
I like that. Advocating for shared blame of the world we live in, because the finger gets pointed plenty at agencies already.
Yeah.
You just feel like you don't have to do that. Deservedly so, though. They've played their part as well. John, I love it. Thanks again for this awesome episode. Guys, like the video, rate and review on audio apps, and we'll catch you on the next one later.
Bye.